Good evening. My name is Ed Reed, and I'm the program director here at Fair Count. Last May, Fair Count launched a Black Men Count to ensure that Black men are counted in the 2020 census. But with the recent events in Minneapolis and Central Park, even right here in Georgia, it gives the phrase Black Men Count a whole new meaning. While these events are recent, they are indicative of a larger issue in our nation's history. When discussing the killings of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and others, there's an undeniable pattern. So today is the first episode of Undercounted, Black Men Speak, where we will have together a panel of Black men across different disciplines, backgrounds to address what it feels like to work in our communities and make change. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone that Fair Count is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. As such, we do not advocate for the defeat, election, or re-election of any person from any political party. Now let's turn to our esteemed guests. First, we have Reverend Elijah Zehu. We have CEO Ryan Wilson, NAAC President James Major Woodall, and we hope to be joined by Mr. Bakari Sellers here very soon. So I want to get the conversation started today. We've seen all over social media that people keep saying, and all this time, nothing is changing because we're still dealing with the issues that our parents and our grandparents dealt with. At times, it can feel like, what's the point? What's going on? Why bother participating in a system that does not seem to want change? Now turning to our historian on the panel, Elijah. I know a lot of people say that nothing has changed, but is that actually true? Is there any truth to that narrative at all? How's nothing changed over so many years? Can we point to any progress in our country's history for Black people in particular?
First of all, before I answer the question, Ed, I just want to thank you for having me on the panel, for getting to be with these guests who are brilliant and doing really cool things in their own right. And so I really appreciate Fair Count. I'm a big fan. Love the work that you all do. And to get straight to the point with the question, I think it's a tough question, right? It's a question that people write PhD dissertations on. It's a question that we're still trying to figure out that's at the heart of really the Black political movement and struggle. But here's what I'll say. From the moment that we got here, right, we've been making progress. From the moment that we came on American soil, we've been struggling for freedom. Dr. Gaylord Wilmore, a historian of Black religion, likes to say that since Black people have been here, Black folk have been struggling for freedom. And so Black people have always been making progress with everything that they do as their political conditions have changed, as our legal status has changed, as we've been able to even make gains in hold elected office, to be in some of the most powerful positions that the country offers. But while we've made progress, what's true is that the institutions that make up this nation have not made progress. And that's where so many people get upset, is that, when you look at American history, you see that some of the same institutions that were responsible for our being here, for the problems that long existed here, have not readjusted themselves, have not reformed themselves, have not repaired themselves, right? To live in this moment and to be present in this moment where they follow the progress that we have made, that we've been pushing for. Last year in the 1619 Project, Nicole Hannah-Jones wrote that Black people have been the perfecters of this democracy, right? And it's a profound and beautiful and bold statement. But one of the things that she highlights in saying that is that the democracy is imperfect, that the democracy is flawed, and that the democracy needs to be reformed. And so when we think about our progress and we think about the progress that needs to happen in this country, we have to hold the progress that we as Black people have made with all of our political and legal gains with the sort of the slow movement of the institutions that we are a part of in the nation as a whole. And I think when you look outside in the streets, I think what they're trying to do is to get the institutions, to get the nation, to get the cities and the states to catch up with our desires, with our claim, with our struggle for freedom.
Well, thank you so much for that response, and thank you for getting us off to a great start with the history there. So in the early 2010s, there was a big push for body cameras on police to film their activity. While there were some cities who did institute this policy for police officers, others did not. Nonetheless, publicized video footage of police brutality seems to go viral, but does not guarantee a conviction or even an arrest in some of these cases for officers. As we have seen time and time again, particularly, even right here with some of the recent events. I'm turning now to Ryan Wilson, who's CEO of the Gathering Spot here in Atlanta, Georgia. Ryan, what do you think about publicizing footage of police brutality on Twitter or other social media websites? What do you think is the impact of being inundated with these videos on the public conscience?
Well, Ed, I want to first thank you for having me here, and I'm in agreement. This is an amazing panel. Honored to be with these gentlemen. I'm going to answer the last question and then your question, if it's okay, because I think that there's some really important things that are being discussed in our community that we've got to really examine. To me, we are part of a continuum, right? And I think that it is important to understand the history in many ways to know where we're going moving forward. I've been saddened to see some signs at protests that seem to suggest that our ancestors in many ways, shape, or form weren't up to much, right? And I think that why that's sad for me is that is completely doesn't tie with history, right? I mean, we have been a very resilient people the entire time that we've been in this country, and there have been forms of resistance the entire time. Now, did we achieve our goal? We didn't, right? I mean, I think that it's fair to say that, and there's a lot more to do, right? But I don't think that achieving the goal by dismissing, or even in some instances disrespecting our history is necessary, right? We can still, both of these things can be true. We can advocate passionately for justice now and talk about the things that haven't been accomplished, while at the same time acknowledging that there have been people that have come before us that many of which have lost their lives to make it possible for us to be in this position, although not perfect. And to your question around the cameras, I don't know. It's increasingly tough for me. I'm monitoring my own reaction over the years, having now seen more murders on tape than I believe anybody really should, and it's desensitizing me. Right? I'll be honest in that it doesn't have the same reaction that it did the first or second or fifth time that I saw these tapes, but I still think it's important that we see them. Right? We've got to know, right, and be able to really do more than just describe, but see what's happening in our communities. And that's oftentimes been the ways across a variety of social issues that changes have started to occur. So although terrible on one hand, again, because I think that we're getting to a place where you can't have the same emotional reaction, it also is necessary. And so I would encourage us to tastefully, as best we can, in honoring the lives that are in these videos, continue to show what abuse and what brutality, and ultimately when justice isn't achieved, that the circumstances are warranted that justice needed to be achieved. And so we've got to press forward.
Thank you, Ryan. So I'm going to get Major in on this part of the conversation as well. We saw that the role that the video footage played in the Ahmaud Arbery case here in Georgia, even 2 months after the killing actually occurred. Is there an argument to be made that the public pressure should be the tactic to get the results that we actually desire in some of these cases? What are some of the methods that the NAACP has used to bring attention to different cases?
Most definitely. And thank you, Ed, for all the work that you do at Fair Count and what you've done thus far. And to all the other panelists assembled here, you all are some amazing gentlemen, and I'm honored to be here with you. Now, I want to answer the question by addressing the last question. I believe what people failed to realize is that one, the prosecutors had the video of Ahmaud Arbery's killing and murder and lynching 2 months prior to the rest of the world seeing it. They saw what we eventually saw, but yet failed to do their job. And so to I guess conclude or imply that the very video was the precursor to why justice is in process now, I believe is not necessarily accurate. However, I do attribute the, I guess, public pressure, if you will, to more voices being heard and seen and shouted all around the world. And so I would caution us, however, to suggest that it's necessary for every single person to see every single video, because at some point, we are in 2020, and at some point, enough becomes enough. And every single video that we see, I mean, I'm only 26, and I've seen my share of videos of dead bodies, and I'm scarred for life. I mean, I'm going to have to get therapy at some point, if not sooner rather than later, because of the damage that's been done to my mental and to my emotional health. And to believe that that kind of baggage is necessary for our people to get justice is just simply insufficient to me. And I believe that's why we have the level of uprisings that we're seeing in the state and all over this country. We have to get to a point where justice and the system of legal process works with or without public pressure. Because if the public pressure is needed for people to do their jobs, then we need to make a new system. And that's just why, and again, that's just why people are standing up right now, because it shouldn't take that much. It shouldn't take that kind of public outcry for people to see what we all have seen for generations. We saw Emmett Till's body maimed and lynched and burned, and still there was no justice. We've seen Eric Garner. We've seen Shatil Wilson. We've seen Mike Brown. We've seen Breonna Taylor. We've seen the videos, and yet here we are again, where there still is no justice. And so I'm grateful for this conversation. I'm grateful for the advocacy. However, we're gonna have to make some very difficult decisions in the coming days about what it is, what it is that we do moving forward, and how this system looks moving towards the brighter future.
Thank you, Major. So, now when we talk about the issues of police brutality amongst, our community, that is one conversation. But the conversation between our community and others outside the community is very different, as all of you would know. And so what are some of the ways we can open the lines of communication with others to bring them in? How do we open up the conversation to a helpful and constructive manner? So I want to turn first to you, Elijah, on this question. I know that you serve in a very progressive, historically white church in Washington, D.C. What are some observations that you have about what moments look like to those outside of our community, particularly in times like we're going through right now? What are some things allies can do in times like this to show that they're in support and that they're in solidarity with us?
Yeah, no, thank you again for the question, Ed. And I want to say, Ryan and James, I think your responses were really on point, about how we got here so far and what we need to do to hold in tension, right? The struggle that we're in right now and the history that we have. And I think that connects to the question that you're asking about people outside of our community. And, is that they need to understand perhaps the moment that we live in is a moment that hopefully is forcing them to understand that all is not well in this country, and it all has not been well in this country for a very long time. For far too long, people have looked at the Black struggle for freedom as though it was just for us Black people. But part of what studying our history reminds us of, and part of what's so important about this moment, is that it shows that Black people's contributions to this country are central to the thriving and the life and the flourishing of this country, right? And so part of what I think needs to happen is what's happening right now, is that people are being jolted, right, out of their ambivalence to see that we're demanding for our lives to matter. And this isn't a new struggle. This is a struggle we've been demanding for since we got here, right? And one historian likes to say that, look, since Black folk came to this country, they have been trying to be free. And so this is a continuation of that struggle that goes back to 1619 and even before. And I think what people outside of our community are finally starting to understand is that this is a struggle that they need to be invested in. And, you know, and I think this is a good moment, right, to say to them that, like, you know what, it took a long time, but we're grateful for the people who want to be invested. But if you're now going to be invested, part of what we have to do is we have to share with them that there is this whole canon of Black intellectual thought, of Black political advocacy, of the Black struggle for freedom, and they need to engage with it. They need to learn. They need to go to the sources. They need to go to Fannie Lou Hamer and the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party. They need to go to Frederick Douglass, right? They need to go to the Black Convention movement of the 19th century. They need to go to Ida B. Wells Barnett and listen and read what she wrote to first broadcast lynching at a national level. They need to go to the Lynching Museum in Montgomery when it opens back up. They need to engage with Black history, engage with Black culture, engage with Black literature, and also, and I tell them my church members this all the time, you know, part of what we also have to do is to recognize that they have power in this, right? That, like, they employ people and they employ people who are Black. And so part of the question is, how are you as a manager? What type of vendors are you using? Who are you contracting with? There are Black people doing excellent things across each and every discipline. How are they being engaged? How are you tapping into that? How are you supporting that? And how are you putting yourself on the line for freedom right now? And in a way, you know, a big part of what that means in this country is, where's your money going? Who's your money supporting right now? Are you supporting activists financially? Are you using your voice to say, actually, these people are in the right, and here's my pocketbook, here's my debit card, here's the cash, right? And so I think that combination of engaging our rich intellectual sources and engaging the movement right now is the first step. And I believe that once they do that, they'll see and find within themselves the creative vision that they have to move forward.
Thank you so much, Elijah. We're going to take a second here to add Bakari Sellers to the conversation, and then I want to turn to you, Major, to get back to you on that, follow up on that question. So thank you so much, Bakari, for joining us. We will we'll be getting you right here in the conversation just after we give Major an opportunity to respond to the previous questions. Thank you for joining us. We know, Major, that the NAACP has a history of coalition building. You know, what are some of the ways that the NAACP has advocated and coordinated with other organizations to have an impact? We know you all put out a statement here in Georgia with some of the events over the past weekend as well. So just want to hear from you in terms of, how do we really go about coalition building in our communities?
Most definitely. And it's a two-part response. One is that in order to build coalition, you must be able to trust the people that you're working with and to trust them to honor the covenant of organizing and activism. One being protect your people at all costs, and two being a quote that we often refer to by Emil Cabral: tell no lies, claim no easy victories. And so with the coalition that we formed here in Georgia, it's called the Just Georgia Coalition, which is made up of about 10 organizations, from the Southern Center to Fair Fight to the ACLU to the Malcolm X grassroots movement, you know, the Black Male Voters Project, Black Voters Matter, the Georgia NAACP, Color of Change. I mean, I feel like I'm missing some. So as the Baptist preacher, we get in trouble when we start naming. But those organizations found at just-georgia.org, we have worked day in and day out to not only get justice for Ahmaud, but justice for every single man and woman, boy and girl who have been lost in this state due to police brutality, due to aggressive uses of force, due to citizens' arrest, due to just injustice and racial terrorism. And we have put together demands that really highlight the urgency, again, of this moment to be able to reform the necessary laws and systematic failures that continue to kill our people. And so with that being said, we have come together again this weekend to gratefully, not to bury someone, but to stand with a family that had 2 college students here in the AUC brutalized by Atlanta Police Department. And so that's, again, the kind of culture that you see being addressed and really kind of called out by all the uprisings that we're seeing all over the city and all over the state and literally all over the nation.
Thank you, Major. So at Fair Count, we're fighting for a fair and accurate census on a daily basis for every person to be heard, when we vote as well. But in a larger sense, we fight for people to be involved in these acts of civic participation and believe that they can bring change to their respective communities. Our founder, Stacey Abrams, said the other day, people think that the census is about statistics. It's not. It's about power. After decades of being undercounted, we see the impact of systematic disenfranchisement in our share of political power. So I want to turn now to Bakari Sellers to get in on the conversation here. There's some very real connection between communities who are left out of the story of America and the census, particularly the 2020 census. We also see the very real disconnect between our brothers and a system that was not built to serve them in particular. How do we build a bridge to encourage participation in both? We have to do both at the same time. So how do we encourage participation in a time, particularly right now, where people are discouraged? I know looking on social media today, people were discouraged at work. It was one of those Mondays that people just did not want to be where they were today. So how do we go about dealing with that, particularly in our community?
And that's a tough question at this time. First, my apologies for being late. The President of the United States was giving a speech in the Rose Garden, and then tear gas peaceful protesters. I guess it ties into this answer to walk across the street to have a photo op outside, and it's pure mayhem and chaos. And also stated that he was going to invoke, the United States military. And so I apologize for being a little bit late. That's an interesting question because people are so filled with despair right now. And even more importantly, what you're seeing in the streets is not just a reaction to George Floyd, but you're seeing decades, if not centuries upon centuries of systemic racism and injustice, which are taking away the faith and hope of many Black folk in this country. I do think, though, that the energy that we have is white hot right now in the streets, and we have to figure out a way to activate that and mobilize that and organize that. And one of the things that I can say, though, is that we have to center and focus that energy on something right now. Nothing drives me crazier than people who want the energy that we have right now to be peaceful and just wait to vote in November. I think that's apathetic. I think that is insensitive to the trauma people are facing. And I think we have to have tangible solutions right now. At the rate we're going, they just killed another brother overnight in Louisville. He owned a restaurant that fed cops for free. He was shot last night, and ironically enough, the body cameras for the Louisville Police Department were off. And so at the rate we're going, if we wait until November, that's probably like 7, 8, 9, 10 more people who we will see and lose their lives in the streets of this country. And so what my answer to your question is, we have to come up with very tangible, robust ideals right now, things that we can do right now. We have to be calling out for action items right now. And the census is definitely one of those things. That's my 4-pound Yorkie, I'm sorry. He sounds like a pit bull, but this is what happens when you work from home. I don't have to wear pants, but I got to deal with my Yorkie. So my apologies. But we have to give people tangible action items right now if they're going to change their plight.
Thank you so much. And I think he was just barking in agreement to what you were saying. So appreciate that. So I want to now point a little bit of that question over to Major. Our nation's history and the news over the last few weeks has shown that there's a need for systematic change and that young people want to lead that charge. Stacey Abrams said that the way we win is to overwhelm the system this November with our participation. As a young leader, what motivates particularly young Black people to go to the polls and vote?
Thanks for that question. I think it's twofold. One is policies and candidates that they actually believe in. And so you're not going to have people show up for a person or people who are not only not speaking to their issues, not addressing the kind of challenges that they're facing, right, that just simply only shows up when it's election time, but doesn't really address the kind of complaints and charges and challenges that people, everyday people, are facing, human beings that are struggling, right? And so when you have people that inspire and motivate and empower people to make decisions themselves, as opposed to acting as though they're kind of tyrannical and authoritative, then you'll have people showing up to the polls. And in addition to that, I believe that this is going to be a very interesting election cycle because people are done dying. We are done dying. And so we do not compromise with white supremacy, not one bit. And so when we show up, we're going to show up and support those who show up and support us. And if you don't support us nor show up for us, we're not voting for you. And I think that has been loud and clear since day one. And so as we talk about getting out the vote and mobilizing communities, we need to also be talking about holding elected officials accountable and forcing them and ensuring that they actually do their jobs. We saw in Brunswick, there was a district attorney who did not do her job. We had another district attorney in Waycross who failed to prosecute the murders of Ahmaud Arbery. Them two need to go. And so I know Fair Count is a nonprofit organization, but the NAACP is a C4 organization, and we can mobilize our people to ensure that people who do not represent our interests are no longer elected and no longer serving in office. So that's exactly what we're going to do.
Thank you, Major. And I think Ryan wanted to add a few other comments to this particular question. So Ryan?
I think Major said the bulk of what I was going to say. I'll just offer that I think it's really important for us, similar to my previous comments around understanding that we're part of a continuum and understanding the history that we're a part of, to also understand the importance of voting. I mean, it sounds simple, right? But I think that it's not fully being unpacked in the way that it could be, where it's not simply the goal to just show up at the ballot box. I mean, that's the end result, right? But what we need folks to do prior to that act is to really think about, and part of, I think, what our collective responsibility is to do is what political agenda, what type of political power are we trying to build before we go to the ballot box? I think sometimes when folks hear us just say, go vote, right, that is the action. The action happens long before you actually make it there. And it's important that we make sure that the community is focused on that effort. We are white hot right now, right? And it's with being white hot, we have the opportunity to start to talk about what things we want to see on a local, state, and federal level from our elected officials. Once we get that organized, right, and get it to the candidates for their consideration and hopefully acceptance, then we go vote, right? And so that's why the action matters. And it's important to, I think, to give some additional context, given all that's going on, that it isn't just us, participating in our civic duty casually, that there's more behind that act that should be brought to the ballot box.
Thank you, Major, and also thank you, Ryan. One of the reasons why we created Undercounted Black Men Speak was to offer a safe place to have a much needed conversation on what it means to be a Black man in spaces that make it, very difficult or hard at times. Ryan, one of the first Black Men Speak events we had in person was at the Gathering Spot. You and I having a really, a real intimate, informal dialogue. And the conversation was much different than what we're having today. But Bakari, I want to turn to you. You often looked at as a public voice on issues for the Black community. How do you balance taking care of yourself as a Black man and still advocating sometimes adversarial spaces?
That's a good question. I don't know, man. I'm still working on that. You got a reverend here, couple of them. You probably need to ask them for some prayers and sustenance to throw my way. Shout out to Ryan, though. I've been to the Gathering Spot, used it a bunch of times, and thank you for it's an awesome place you have where we can gather down in the A. So I appreciate that. In my new book, I just wrote My Vanishing Country. I talk about anxiety and the trauma of what it means to be a Black man in this country. I'm fortunate enough to have some, people I talk to like Tyler Perry and Bishop Jakes and Pastor Furtick and others who keep me grounded and give me some centering, but it's hard. I mean, we have these waves of ups and downs. You have to be the head of your household. You have to be a father to your beautiful, brown children. And it can become overwhelming. And so I take it day by day. I allow my anxiety to fuel my my striving for a certain level of success. People ask me this question, and that's what whenever you're talking to me, it's a question that I chuckle at. I don't know how to answer. People ask me, where are you going to be in 5, 10 years? Man, I don't know. I'm trying to make the most of today. I try to win. Like my whole thing is I try to win 24 hours at a time. You know, that's how I live my life. And I think that if we begin to eat an apple with the first bite, I think we'll have a great deal more success. Black men go through things in this country that no other group of people go through. And it's okay to say that. But we also need to make sure that we can talk to people who are not just our barbers, right? Like we can talk to people who have letters behind their name to help us, or in front of their name, Rev, to help us digest what we're taking in. And so that's why I'm proud to be a part of conversations like this. I'm gonna have to hop off in a minute because the president is going crazy, fellas. I know this is a nonpartisan thing, but you know, I have to jump over to Anderson Cooper, but I'm gonna hang out for a little bit longer. But I want to ask for something from everybody watching and everybody on here, which is just to keep me in your prayers. You know, I think that oftentimes we forget that we're tied in this network of mutuality, right? This garment of destiny, and we're in this thing together wholeheartedly. Whether or not you're in the movement or not, we still got you. Because the common thing that all 5 of us know is that no one can be free until we're all free. There's nobody who has the ability to reach that promised land of freedom without all of us. And so the unique thing about carrying our neighborhoods and doing those things is we have to make sure that we're lifting up the least of these. And the only thing that I would caution us to do is to make sure that we don't just take our efforts here to Zoom and Facebook Live and just to fair count, but we actually meet Black men where they are. You know, for far too long, we've been like, come hang out with us, right? Meet me at the Oak Room or the gathering spot, right? But we have to be able to take our ministry to them, take our ministry to the barbershops, take our ministries out to the streets, take it to the high school football games, take it to the, you know, the young people who play sports. And that's the important thing that we have to do as a collective. And that's why I'm proud to be here. So if I slide out, just know it, blame it on my schedule. Don't blame it on my heart.
We appreciate that in your comments. Before you head out, there's one quick thing I want to touch on that you just, you talked about. You talked about your family and your sons. Our sons can't quite comprehend, what's going on right now, but one day they will be able to comprehend, what happened even here in 2020. What conversations did your father have with you? What conversations do you think you'll have with your son in the future?
Those conversations, my father was somebody, and it builds into a larger theme that I'll mention. My father was always talking about living in truth, right? No matter what you do, you got to live in your truth. You always have to be on this journey. Have this insatiable desire to learn as much as possible, and then be on this journey for freedom, become a part of something larger than yourself. But my father also was unique. And it's one of the things I want to emulate with my children, in that I had this theory, which I think bears truth, that you can't teach a kid to be a Black doctor if they've never seen one. All right. You can't teach a kid to be a Black lawyer if they've never seen one. And so one of the things we have to do is I have to go out and show, allow kids to touch my hair, as that kid did Barack Obama in the Oval Office, so that he can know that he too can be on CNN. And Ryan has to do the same thing, so he too can know that he can be the epicenter of the Atlanta business community one day when he grows up. And James, you got to do that too. Elijah, you got to do that too, to let them know that they too can be a part of this struggle in a real meaningful way. That heroes walk among us, and being examples is the number one thing we can do for our community.
Thank you so much. We appreciate the comments and for joining the conversation. So Ryan, I want to go back to you, and we talked a little bit about the gathering spot. So how have you used the space to foster a conversation between Black men on the issues that matter? We talked a little bit about you being a co-chair of Black Men Count in Georgia, but also leading sort of the first Black Men Speak in-person event that we had. I also know that the Gathering Spot's been doing some pretty cool things to provide for their members and community, as you would like to say, during the COVID-19 pandemic. Just talk a little bit about how the community at the Gathering Spot is fostering that conversation.
I think sometimes as Black people, and especially as Black men, we don't realize how many spaces we go into where we're only tolerated. And we've grown accustomed to it in many ways. And so my mission at the Gathering Spot is to create a place where we're celebrated. It's more than just being there. Black men and women lead the experience. It's curated by Black folks. And so we've had the privilege of partnering with a number of organizations. Um, uh, Tremendous gratitude for you and the team at Fair Count. But we try to use the space and the greater community to host important conversations and to make sure that information is shared, to encourage one another, and sometimes just to get to know one another socially. I think that's important too. And so at any given day inside of TGS, I mean, there's meetings and strategy that's happening, but there's also people that are just connecting with one another. And we've always believed that if we allowed space and created space for both to occur, that some really magical things could happen, and that folks would leave knowing that they were celebrated, and not merely tolerated. Given that, again, I would offer that the majority of places that we go to don't provide us that sort of celebration.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate that. So, the last segment of our conversation tonight is for everybody. It's all four of us joined in on the conversation. Our series is called Undercounted, Black Men Speak, under the program of Black Men Count that we've talked a little bit about tonight. I want each of you to say a verb behind Black men. So Black men and whatever your verb is. That you think addresses how you feel represents you. So we want to start with Elijah. So tell us a little bit about what you're feeling and how that would describe you right now.
Yeah, I would say I probably have just a couple quick things, right? I would say Black men study, right? Because I think that that's a big part of what we're advocating for, right? Is that like when we go out onto the streets, we're going out because we know the history of this country. We know our own stories. We know the stories of our brothers, our sisters, our mothers, our friends. And we bring with us this great canon that we have of written and oral tradition, right? And so I think that Black men study. I think also that Black men fight, right? We are fighting for justice. We're fighting for our community. We're fighting for the next generation. We're fighting for ourselves and the right that we have to live and to be free in this country. And then the other thing that I would say, if I had to have one more verb, I would say that Black men feel, right? And that's a big part for me. One of the flip sides of systematic racism, right, is toxic masculinity, right? Is that we sometimes have to perform a type of overconfidence that we may not have because we're human, right? And so part of what Black men feel means to me, right, is that we get emotional, that we get sad, that we feel deeply when we see our brothers, our sisters, our siblings treated unjustly. And that's a part of what motivates us to fight for the things that we fight. And there has to be more space for our emotions to flower so that we can be fully human, so that we can be fully free.
Thank you so much. Ryan, turning to you now.
I'd say that Black men are encouraged, and I mean we're resilient people. That this is something that I think that if you look at our history, it's as close to as an objective fact as there could be, and we've got to continue to stay encouraged. This is not been an easy journey by any stretch, but one that we will overcome, and one that I think we need to be focused in continuing to frame, despite the challenges, despite being tired and really sick of this, right? In many ways, we have to continue to stay resilient and encouraged. And so I think that's where we are, and I think that conversations like this demonstrate that we're going to continue to stay focused on what can be accomplished, stay together, and keep up the fight until we get to the other side of this.
Thank you, Ryan. All right, turning to you now, mate.
My verb would be a verb that I heard a man scream maybe 7 years ago in the name of Eric Garner. And then again, just a few days ago, where Brother George Floyd screamed it out as well. That word is black man breathe. And as a preacher, one of my favorite scriptures is let everything that has breath praise ye the Lord. And too many of our people are not able to breathe due to not only police brutality and racial terrorism and violence, but they also can't breathe because the water that they drink and the air that they breathe and intake is polluted and contaminated. They can't breathe because when they walk foot outside of their home, they're literally characterized as guilty of some kind of crime. They can't breathe because when they walk down the street, they're literally hunted like dogs. They can't breathe because when they are in school, that they are giving the kind of curriculum that ultimately lends itself for them ending up in prison. They cannot breathe, but we still serve a God who created us through the very dirt that we build our entire empire on, and God would take God's own breath and blow God's own breath into that soil, and it became a living soul. So black men can breathe. And when we breathe, it not only allows for us to be able to give God glory, but it also allows for black men to live and live life more abundantly. So that's really all I have, is that black men breathe.
And that's a lot. That's a mouthful. So we certainly appreciate that. Thank you, Major. I'm going to turn the camera down so you can see, black men count. I think we need to say it. It can't be said, enough. In Georgia, for instance, in 2020, there was an estimated 67,000 black men could go undercounted in the census, which could cost our communities over $154 million on an annual basis. Think about how we could be using those funds. But, black men count, that's the easy way out for me to be able to say in terms of, my verb. I would also, indicate we need to innovate. Black men innovate. Innovation and creativity, something that, will certainly be a brightness and a bright spot for our communities for years to come, for our kids, for our grandkids. Black businesses, when we think about places like the Gathering Spot, which is a place for people to come and sort of join in on that entrepreneurial spirit. And be able to innovate in a space that we don't feel intimidated, in a space that we feel safe and secure. And so I would say that black men count, but black men also innovate. So thank you all for participating in that little fun activity, kind of close out our conversation. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Undercounted Black Men Speak. Thank you to each of our panelists, Mr. Bakari Sellers, Reverend Elijah Zehu, Mr. Ryan Wilson, and Georgia NAACP President James Major Woodall. Thank you so much. I know all of you have very busy schedules, particularly with everything going on right now. I follow you all on social media, so I know that you're here, there, and everywhere. So certainly keep up the good fight and all the work that you're doing. But also thank you to those that are at home, that are tuning in via Facebook Live for our discussion. We've also recorded this conversation. We'll have it on our YouTube channel for those to be able to view in the future. If we didn't answer any of your questions, check back in the comments, as we'll be able to answer them there on Facebook Live. And we hope that all of you joining us tonight will also be able to join us right back here again next Monday night, June 8th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We plan to have a very special conversation of the Undercounted Black Men Speak series with some black men as well. Remember that you can fill out your census online right now at my2020census.gov. Again, my2020census.gov. Take you about 10 minutes to do. So before you log off your computer and shut it down tonight, you can get that done. But until next time, follow us at Fair Count on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And we hope to see you again next Monday night. Take care, be safe, be healthy, and we'll see you soon.